Speaking of fat cat CEOs and executives, Clarence Thomas is obviously deeply in debt to one of them, Harlan Crow. His father was Trammell Crow. The company is Trammell Crow, or one of the companies. And now we're learning that Clarence Thomas voted to end federal rent control and tenant eviction protections when Harlan Crow's company was arguing that that should be the case. So here you got Clarence Thomas taking millions and millions of dollars of vacations and gifts from Harlan Crow, millions of dollars worth, over a period of almost 20 years. 5 years after Clarence Thomas was put on the court, Harlan Crow strikes up a friendship with him, and they become good buddies. And then Harlan Crow, his company, his real estate holding company, says, hey, wait a minute, there was this law that was passed in 2020. Actually, it wasn't even a law that was passed. It was a policy put into place by the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, that said that during the pandemic, you may not evict people, even if they're not paying their rent. Because they didn't want people out on the streets where they could get exposed to, or they would be exposing others to, COVID. This was before the vaccines. So Crow's company goes to the Supreme Court, or a bunch of these companies go to the Supreme Court and they say, you've got to strike this down. This is hurting us. We've got people in our apartment buildings and our rental houses that are not paying rent, and we can't evict them. And Clarence Thomas twice votes to say, yeah, go ahead and evict them, to benefit Harlan Crow's company. In July, between two rulings, Crow Holdings, which owns apartment buildings, student housing, and manufactured housing nationwide, was cited in congressional testimony for being one of the country's most frequent eviction filers, despite the moratorium. In March of 2020, Crow Holdings Capital warned investors that this pandemic and this policy was, quote, substantial government intervention that could end up, quote, substantially eliminating market participants' ability to continue to implement certain strategies to manage risk. And did Thomas recuse himself? No. He helped out his buddy, which has led Ed Markey, the congressman from Massachusetts, day before yesterday, to call for Clarence Thomas to resign. He said, this is what Ed Markey said. He said, I will say what needs to be said. Clarence Thomas should resign from the Supreme Court of the United States. His reputation is unsalvageable. He added, it is evident that he cannot judge right from wrong, so why should he be judging the country's most important cases on its highest court? He is joined by in this call by members of Congress, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, and Senator Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat from Connecticut, who said, and I quote, Justice Thomas should resign to uphold the court and American justice. The unavoidable, sickening appearance of impropriety stains trust and credibility in our entire judiciary. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, this degree of corruption is shocking, almost cartoonish, and said that he should be impeached. Now, back in the day, Abe Fortas, when he was called out for taking a $15,000 legal fee that had been postponed for work he had done before he was on the court, he resigned. He was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. Now, the main reason he resigned was because they were going after his wife. Now, this was something that Mitchell, Attorney General Mitchell and President Nixon put together to try to get Fortas to leave the court. Fortas was the most liberal member of the court, just like Thomas is the most conservative. And when they went after Fortas's wife, that's when he resigned. Hint, hint.